This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. My name is Andy Steele, and I am the host. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Truls Lie. He's a newspaper man from Norway, and David Llewelyn, a mechanical engineer also from Norway. And they're going to be talking about an article that Truls published surrounding the controlled demolition evidence, and it stirred up a lot of controversy there in Norway. This is a very interesting story, yet another chapter in the struggle to get a new investigation into the destruction of those three buildings. You're going to want to hear it, and it's a long interview, so we're going to jump right into it tonight. I'll be playing that for you in just a moment.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Alright, I have two really great guests this week from Norway. The first one is Truls Lie. He has 25 years of publishing experience, being the editor-in-chief, director in Norway for 3 newspaper publications. He lives in Oslo and Berlin. He's also, one of those publications is the New Times Review, which is a European documentary magazine. My other guest is David Llewelyn. He's a mechanical engineer with 45 years of experience. He's worked around the world in the offshore oil industry, mostly with major oil companies. He's been consulting in Norway since 2000 and is chairman of the Scandinavian group of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, which is a British-based organization with 120,000 members worldwide. That's a lot. Guys, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You know, I don't have a lot of money to travel around the world, so I love this opportunity to be able to talk to people through this show from different parts of the planet that I have never been to and don't have much experience with, so this is a real treat for me. We're going to start off, as we normally do on this show, by having you guys each elaborate on your backgrounds, your history professionally. We're going to start with Truls. Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I started from the computer business. I was developing systems. So I had a kind of deep insight into a lot of, not kind of mechanical, but more this kind of information society. And then I studied this philosophy for several years, also in New York and San Francisco, and then established a newspaper. Or we bought an old newspaper here in Norway who was 170 years old and made it into a weekly newspaper. So that was my start of this editor-in-chief career for 25 years, coming from philosophy and computer science media. So that's where it started off, yeah.
That is so great to be able to be part of something that is so old. 170 years a newspaper has been going, and you take it over, and it's just like a legacy that you're a part of. And David, please elaborate on your background.
Well, I'm an engineer, and I loved putting things together and big engineering. And I discovered the oil industry and the drilling business, which was amazing. And basically, the oil industry has been going into deeper and deeper water since about 1960, and I was part of it from the beginning of the 70s. And the engineering solutions we've had to develop, now we produce everything on the seabed. It's quite amazing in meters of water. So we've moved right from simple stuff to complex stuff. So I've enjoyed that. I've kind of near the end of my career now, and I became a consultant. I moved to Norway and fell in love with a Norwegian lady, and now I'm kind of still consulting one of the things I did was throughout my career, I've been part of a professional engineering organization. And I've decided to put a bit back into that by being the chairman of a group of about 150 engineers in Scandinavia. So we meet and discuss issues and events and make visits to various factories and sites. So I'm a happy engineer with lots of different experience all around the world.
That's great. Now, part of the reason we have this show, one is to highlight what our activists are doing around the world and to bring you news about 9/11 and the science behind the demolitions that took place in New York on that day, but also to document the stories that go along with this issue in history. And when Ted told me what you guys have been put through, I knew I had to have you on, and so I was getting some of the story clarified for me by David before the show began recording. And I guess this all began with an article, Truls, so can you please tell our audience about that?
No, actually, this goes far further back in 2003 when I was heading this Nordic issue of Le Monde Diplomatique, the French monthly newspaper, which is around in about 30 countries today. And I established for 10 years that newspaper here in Norway. It also was read in Sweden and Denmark. And in 2003, we actually had 3-4 investigative articles about 9/11. So, and we had big seminars or a big conference here in Oslo about the three towers, the collapse, and with 300 people attending. So this 9/11 issue for me goes far back, actually. And we also have some people from national television participating in this kind of discussion. And these 3 articles written by a Norwegian reporter was also touching a lot of the background of what we call the more suspicious part of the explanations here about what the FBI was doing before the attacks and what they maybe know. I mean, this is a typical skeptical or what to say, when an investigative reporter is looking into things, he's looking for the explanations if there is some holes, some deficits, that kind of things. And we were the only newspaper in Norway who was looking into these things. And with my background in philosophy and also being for a long time in a weekly newspaper, I had this kind of critical attitude to this, to what we saw here. And so I think that started off a long time ago, 14 years ago. And when we saw some new discussions coming up in the States and other places, I actually did a little comment on Facebook about the kind of demolition theory. But that's also coming back into David Griffin, which I met here in Oslo a couple of times, and I also, in the years passing, was attending one of the seminars up in Boston in the States about, I think maybe that was your organization, with architects and engineers looking into the kind of parallel of seeing demolitions in other big buildings around the world and kind of do a comparison with the 9/11 thing. So, talking with David Griffin for a long time and seeing these kind of things, I'm not a conspiracy theorist myself. I'm really grounded. So, but my skepticism through the years and with Griffin and also 2003 was the kind of background for me publishing now in September this fatal article, which was really destroying our public image here in Norway. So that's kind of the background.
So It's interesting, though, because you're doing what we expect real journalists to do and what people think our journalists are doing here in the United States, or at least they once thought. I think we've lost a lot of trust in our corporate media here in this country now. But in the years past, we assumed that journalists were doing their due diligence and investigating every aspect, looking not just into regurgitating an official story, but really being, the fourth estate, looking out for the people, what we believe that they do. But you actually did that. So what inspired you to, I guess, break from the pack and pursue this line of digging?
You know, with the background in philosophy, you're usually taking a broader perspective or a higher perspective into things. And for example, I can tell you by reading Friedrich Nietzsche, you know, he has this kind of dualism, or kind of, you have the will to truth and you have the will to power. And there is so many people today who is more inspired by the will to power thing. They want to be identified with a group. They want to be inside the power circles. And all these kind of people, maybe you can say that Facebook, who has maybe 250 times as many people attending every day as the biggest news stations there. So the big group of people today is the will to power people who wants to be identified, be on the shore side, be in consensus, not standing outside, and the will to truth people, which I mean is coming from Nietzsche, this kind of truth-seeking, that you are independent, you want to be convinced yourself about things, you want to see the arguments, you want to discuss and look into the facts, and if you don't have the facts, you want to have convincible arguments. So I'm in that kind of smaller group here in the world, which is really looking into things, and I don't want to be, persuaded by a gun or by some people saying, if you don't listen to me, I will put you out in the cold or something. I mean, I've always been very independent, and that's maybe coming from the philosophy of listening to your own mind, to reason. So that's the background for this thing. I was listening to reason, and not people trying to put me off in some direction. I mean, 25 years has been editor-in-chief in kind of more intellectual or more kind of independent media here has made me this person I am, and that's why I'm doing this kind of things.
You know, I really think that it boils down to the kind of person you are. I mean, from my experience, not just in the United States, but talking to people all over the world, you've got three different groups. You got people who just close their minds to it. Actually, it's four different kinds. You got people who just close their minds to it and don't want to think about it. You got the people who will rabidly defend the official story, even if you point out the holes that are in it. You have people who will agree with you, but tell you, well, I'm not going to do nothing about it. You know, that's up to you. I got work and kids and other things on my mind. And then you've got people like yourself and people like the ones that come on the show every single week who actually take up the call and try to do something about it. So it really does just boil down to a personality type. That's what I've figured out after about 10 years of chasing this issue. So again, we're lucky to have people like you in the media. We need more of them. What was the article specifically, if we can hone in on that sparked all of the controversy that brought David in?
Yes, let me just first confirm. I mean, David Griffin is also a very kind of independent mind, who kind of respect for his really patient, working with this for years and years and years. And I also understand there's a lot of people around who has small kids, and they're trying to meet the ends. I mean, they can't sit and read and go and do research and everything. But the strange thing here, which happened with that spark, you said it, and the new article, was there were so many people who were coming with their point of view without reading anything. And that's the kind of new or kind of bad experience here, is that the what you call it, the public, which you have back from the kind of liberal public, which you have from Habermas and these kind of saloons coming up with newspapers a couple of 100 years ago, we still have a kind of expectation that the public, with the people with a kind of academic background or a kind of intellectual or kind of experience background, that they read newspapers and are informed, that they are discussing with arguments and examples and these kind of things. But what happened here was that maybe 75% of the public, they just had a standpoint and wouldn't read and was calling this kind of article everything without having any background for this kind of standpoint. Or the what you call it, the just marking me as a extreme conspiracy theorist, that I was believing that the Americans were behind the whole thing. I mean, there were so many silly kind of assertions about me and what we did, which was not grounded in the article at all. So, and back to the article that sparked the thing. It was actually Tel Walters who wrote the big article, not me. But I was also in my editorial kind of supporting this kind of skepticism about that fire or the gasoline from the airplanes were enough to turn down 3 buildings, especially the building who was not hit at all. That's the kind of skepsis we have to ask and dig into this kind of matter. So that's, I was supporting the main article, the front page article we had here in September. And I also had a third article about conspiracy theories, which has been disclosed as true. So in a way, this kind of 3 articles was sparking off maybe 2,000 comments on Facebook and all, and 6-7 newspapers calling me. I was drawn into the radio here to explain things. I mean, there was really a kind of explosion here. And also on our website, we had maybe 4 times the normal rate of people looking into the articles that month. So it was really a big reaction here, but it was very silly. I mean, kind of tabloid way of doing things.
The article specifically that ended up drawing David into the story here was one that focused on the Twin Towers. Ted helped out with it, Ted Walter, our director of strategy, and that's the one that received a lot of criticism, my understanding of it, and that's where we bring David into it. David, I'm going to turn to you now. First, I want you to tell our audience how you came to be familiar with this issue, because not every engineer or architect is, and then tell us about the article that you wrote for the paper.
Yes, it's a strange story. I was at a workshop with a safety manager from a British company, and he used to be a detective working for the Aberdeen Police in Scotland, and he was the private detective allocated to Prince Charles. So whenever Prince Charles visited Scotland, he was his detective. That's just a side story. But he told me, and we were discussing over a day and socially the world, and he talked about 9/11. And he said, well, all of the police in Aberdeen know that this is a false flag operation. Well, this was in 2009, and I was just gobsmacked. And I mean, I'd had suspicions it didn't look right to me as an engineer. And then he handed me the book by David Ray Griffin, which I read from cover to cover. And I found that really inspiring. But it was interesting, the discussion that Truls was having about facts. As an engineer, I need pretty clear facts. And basically my job is all about studying how things break, how to build things, how metal behaves, how organizations behave. So I was missing the facts. So I was kind of, and I joined AE 9/11 Truth to try and find some more solid facts. And of course, I progressively got overwhelmed by facts from all of these extraordinary stories that are appearing. I mean, there's some amazing, and you know, if half of them are true, it is so scary. But I am struggling with facts, so perhaps I can refer to that.
Sure. What was the most convincing argument that you saw when looking at the evidence of controlled demolition?
Well, I think it was the collapse of Building 7, but I have to say about the Twin Towers that you know, those buildings are designed for a collision from a large aeroplane, and the fact that they came down almost within an hour of the collision in almost identical ways is, for an engineer, a very, very strange situation. The airplanes hit differently, yet both buildings fell down at almost the same time, almost the same way. And in real engineering, you never get replication of such a random event like that. So for me, I have a major problem with looking at the identical failures of the two Twin Towers, particularly on the time scale. So, but I mean that is that. I think there are so many small things, but my main interest is Building 7.
Right, it's so obvious when you watch Building 7 come down, and I'm not an architect or an engineer, but when I saw that building come down, I thought it was a controlled demolition. On the day of September 11th, I watched it, and my brain didn't make a connection. I didn't think, wait, you can't set up a controlled demolition while you have the Twin Towers being attacked. And then it went out of my mind for years until somebody kind of, on the internet, just kind of put it in front of me and pointed out that this can't happen. The straight-down symmetrical collapse of this building, supposedly because of random fires, a few thermally expanding beams in the corner of the building, pushing a girder off its seat. A lot of times when I talk to people and give them the National Institute of Standards and Technology's explanation of what happened, they're converted to the idea of the need for a new investigation because that explanation doesn't make any sense to them. It's not viable, right? So even if they don't want to go there into the idea that it's a controlled demolition, the horrible explanation that we've been given is enough to convince people that this needs to be looked at again, to at least come up with a more viable explanation that makes more sense. So, I mean, yeah, Building 7 is the linchpin for a lot of people, architects, engineers, and just general laymen when they watch it come down.
I agree. And for me, the announcement of the Alaska investigation, the Fairbanks investigation with Leroy Halsey, was a breakthrough, because what that meant is that you were applying real engineering with an expert in structural engineering using the latest technology which wasn't available, modern programs which can run hundreds of times faster than the programs that the guys in NIST had, that can actually analyze what really happened. So this gives us, the engineering community, a chance to recreate the different scenarios to show whether or not the NIST story could possibly be correct. Now, I then looked at why the hell doesn't the BBC and other institutions in the UK pick this up? And it occurred to me that until the engineering organizations start supporting the story, they are going to hold back, and therefore I spoke to my engineering organization on several occasions and finally got connected to the chief engineer of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. And I had a 1-hour session with him to discuss the whole story. And I have to tell you, he was extremely decent about it and polite and listened. But immediately he said, this is incredibly controversial. This is really going to be difficult for us. But I think if there is enough people in the organization asking for us to follow this through, we will pick it up, we will look at it, and we will take a position on this. So the guy's given me his word, and for that reason, I am really excitedly waiting for the report from Alaska, which I hope I can work through with him and a number of other engineers who I've now been enrolling into this, who will support us and demand an in-depth review of the study in the heart of engineering in the UK.
Absolutely. Now, getting back to the article, what prompted you to write it?
Well, I just felt so sad to hear of the reaction to Truls. I mean, I met Truls. I was delighted to meet him, and I just felt like the kid that's been sort of told he can't have an ice cream on a Sunday. It just was it was really, really extraordinary, and I felt like if there's anything I can do, I would do it. And I mean, I don't know if I've helped a lot, but I've written an article which basically says, hey, we need to focus on facts, and there are facts out there, and we can engineer the facts, and we can understand what happens. Let's get on with it, and let's stop criticizing people for looking at, difficult issues.
Right, and that has been what the other side has done for a number of years here in the United States. I remember watching very reasonable people, scientists, go on television early to discuss this issue, and it was very clear that the purpose of the interview was not to explore the facts, get to some truth, but really just to try to shut the person down. Personal attacks would be launched against the guests, and that's all you really saw of it in the early days of the 9/11 truth movement. And then afterwards you would see these hit pieces come out in the media, attacking activists out in the streets, handing out pamphlets, trying to get the word out about the facts surrounding the destruction of these buildings. And it wouldn't really address them at all, and it wouldn't really address the facts. It would focus on straw man arguments. It would revert to a Popular Mechanics book that got published back in many years ago. I think the last publishing of it was in 2011. And there's factual issues with that book. So we've seen that here in the United States. It always amazes me when I see it happen in other countries, because you would like to think that being in another country where this tragedy didn't happen, that they might take a more objective view, and you could write off the reaction of the American corporate media and American people as just being emotional because it happened here. You would think that other countries in Europe and elsewhere would look at this more objectively, but we've seen a lot of the same types of reactions over there. It completely, it doesn't baffle me anymore, because I've kind of learned how things work and how our media is structured, the major media. It makes our job harder, no doubt. What were the arguments that you made? I know you talked about the facts in the article, and I have not read the article myself. So what are some of the points that you laid out regarding Building 7?
Well, I think I tried to reflect what I'm learning from the initial reports from Alaska, but I think there's a very strong argument that the steel expansion due to fire was not the cause of the beam coming loose, or the beam just didn't come loose from the girder didn't come off the column, because it was very interesting the way they calculated NIST calculated. They put an artificial boundary around a corner of the building, and they fixed the outside. So when you get expansion, you get pressure on that girder. In reality, that they're not fixed. The move outwards when it gets hot, and then that would relieve the tension on the girder. It wouldn't get pushed off. And when you see that, it's like a light coming on, because the power of the computing that Leroy was able to use, he could look at the whole entity of the building and see that the beam would never come off its seat. So, but let's assume that something strange happened in the corner of the building, and there was some small damage. I still cannot accept that the building fell down as a perfect parallel collapsed with the roof line falling in a perfect symmetrical free fall mode. Now, when you look at building demolitions, it's quite rare to see a building falling down so symmetrically, and it requires precision use of explosives. So I just cannot see how a failure in one corner could have caused that precision collapse, free fall of the heavy outside skin and presumably a lot of the inside, because the skin wasn't damaged. So how could that building fall down with such symmetry? It would require precision use of explosives or some sort of device to sever the building. It is not going to happen as a result of a single point failure somewhere in the building. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way. And I used in the article, I said, we're being expected to believe that Building 7 fell down like a house of cards. just as you would do with a card house, into a pile on the floor. In fact, a building like this is built like Lego. There's lots of connections, interconnected parts, and a building doesn't fall down in a single rapid collapse. You're going to have a very complex failure, both at the outside, at the side of the building, the inside, and you're going to see a quite different behavior than one that we saw on 9/11.
Well, I obviously concur with that. It's obvious, it's basic physics, it's basic common sense, and one of the reasons that I support 8911 Truth and put so much of my effort and work for the organization is because it's really hard to dismiss the science. It's hard to dismiss the professionals with the credentials to their name making these points. If a journalist goes out and makes the points, they can wave their hand and say, oh, that person is just a conspiracy theorist, or they're just trying to sell more newspapers by creating scandals where they don't exist. They can use these dismissive techniques, but it's really hard to do to the scientists. And I'm not saying they don't do it. They do it, but it's a harder sell when someone actually makes sense, makes their point. And when you see an actual debate of the issue take place between men of science, typically the arguments, in my view as an outside observer, the arguments for controlled demolition of Building 7 make more sense, at least justifying the need for a new investigation. I mean, again, this is 9/11. This was an event that killed a lot of people. It's one of the most iconic events of the 21st century. It should be investigated in every which way that you can, simply to figure out how to prevent something like this from happening again. And narrowing in on the engineering profession, if you really believe that a few thermally expanding beams in the corner of the building can bring a 47-story steel frame high-rise crashing down in 7 seconds, then this should be studied in every engineering class around the world. Just to figure out why this happened and to prevent it from happening again. If NIST is right, that means firefighters are in danger of fighting fightable fires because the building can fall on them. So it should be the most studied event in the engineering profession, but a lot of engineers don't even know about this, I've found when I talk to them. It's absolutely baffling. Truls, so when you ran David's article, here you have a mechanical engineer who knows what he's talking about, basically backing you up. What was the reaction specifically to David's article? Did it influence the dialogue in Norway anyway?
I can tell you that here in Norway we have a daily newspaper which is called Klassekampen, which means the class struggle. It's a kind of leftist daily newspaper here. And our newspaper, Nytid, which is Modern Times in English, was every month put into that newspaper for the last 2 years. And then we had this article talking about this demolition as a possible alternative, since the first one about fire could not be believable. We were thrown out of the paper. I got this email about this was totally unacceptable and it was destroying our cooperation, and they wanted us out. And we had 30,000 copies of this newspaper every month, and then throwing us out was falling down to be alone, which means 5,000 copies. And that's a kind of economical hardship. I mean, when you're just throwing somebody out of a very kind of big distribution of a newspaper because of our front page. And so there was a lot of discussions about why were we thrown out of this daily newspaper because of one article. And as we see here, there was very superficial assertions about what we did, and most people didn't read it. But the editor-in-chief of that daily newspaper, he was the one we addressed in the second article by David. And he was trying, because his name is Bjørgulf Bronn, and he is kind of famous intellectual in Norway, and he has a lot of legitimacy because he has been running this newspaper for the last at least 15 years. And when he is saying something, a lot of people is listening. And in his editorial, first he was saying that I was suddenly doing something they call extreme conspiracy theory, which it was not. And he's also saying that we believed in a 9/11 job. It was an inside job. We did never in this newspaper say anything about what really happened or who was behind it or that kind of things. Because I actually believe, as much as maybe somebody else did it, that the terrorists themselves did the demolition because they wanted it to be more spectacular or being a full job instead of just hitting some tops or a couple of buildings. I mean, they could be motivated by explosives themselves. I'm not saying that America was behind it. I mean, this made it happen or let it happen. How can I know that? I'm a serious newspaper editor, so I'm not going too far. But when we were thrown out of this newspaper, we had to defend ourselves. And I was talking for half an hour with that other editor-in-chief about how can we say, not him, not me, we are not experts on this. So let's let the experts discuss this in the public, not. And he didn't accept that. He wanted to be the expert himself. So the next couple of days after throwing us out, he was putting on a whole big page in the front of the paper about telling that the NIST report was true, and putting this kind of evidence from the Popular Mechanics, that kind of magazine who was just printing the press release from 2009 just this year, repeating it again, and he was believing in this column that was pushed aside, etc., and giving full legitimacy to the Bush administration and that kind of government's report. So we had to go against that after, and then we printed the expert, as I wanted to, like David is. I was wondering if somebody out there would say that, okay, maybe we were wrong, we were too hard to Truls Lie, because they really attacked me as a person all over here in Norway. So we had to argue why we thought we were doing a right thing. And I hope the reaction was bigger, but actually we were silenced. I was referring to this on Facebook, and the editor in the other newspaper was just saying, I don't think he would like to argue against David about this. He was just saying something like, we can't believe just YouTube videos or something. I mean, it's so silly just defending you by ridiculing other people. So we didn't have any kind of reasonable discussion here about 9/11, but we had a lot of people supporting us. People who was putting the thumbs up, saying at last we had some people go digging into this issue. We have been so much people here talking about this for years. I mean, I think I got 50 phone calls from people I don't know thanking me for bringing this issue up. But in the more established media, the mainstream media, and also the kind of leftist media who's maybe had this weakest moment of the history, I think, because they are really good in a lot of articles. This weak moment didn't have much reactions. So there was quiet. They didn't argue against it. So I'm not sure what to do with this thing. Maybe it's just passing here in Norway. I mean, Norway should be really the country who should react, because we have so much newspaper reading people here. It's a well-educated population. And so my reaction to this thing is it possible that really so many people in Norway is just listening to the last little assertion by the neighbor and not going into the things? How can they really stand there honestly and say that I was wrong without knowing anything about our arguments? I mean, it's very disappointing.
You know what's funny? There's this phenomenon I've noticed here with us and what we do, is that the corporate media and government tries to label us as a fringe group, quote unquote, but whenever we do break through, like for instance, Richard Gage gets on a show, morning show, here in the United States, it's watched by a lot of people. It ends up being the most popular video in their video archive on their website. Or when we had the Europhysics article, That's the most popular article on that site. So if we're a fringe group, how come there is so much interest? How come there are so many people thanking us? I mean, it should show that this is an issue that should be touched upon, even if people are sort of on the fence, they don't know, and they don't want to get into who did it. As Truls was saying, he thinks it could have been the terrorists that set explosives. I mean, it's something that people are definitely interested in, and it's something that also, if you're just looking at it from a ratings perspective of a TV programmer or a newspaper publisher trying to sell more newspapers, it's something that'll get the public's attention and keep them watching or keep them reading. I want to know, as somebody who has worked in the media for so long, just from your perspective, how does this happen? How do you, and you may not have the answer, it sounds that you are trying to wrap your mind around this yourself, but I'm going to ask you, how do you have so much uniformity in the media, not just, within the United States, but throughout Europe and the world? What causes that, from your experience?
Yeah, it's a hard to know. I mean, there's so many different groups around, but the main public reading newspapers here, I think they are... I mean, in this case, there is a lot of different opinions, of course, in different cases, but in the 9/11 cause, I've been discussing this with a lot of people. Why is it so much emotional and tabooing thing? And 2-3 things has come up in discussions, like when the war on terror started after 9/11, there has been invested so much in that kind of, a kind of mythology. The other against us, they're attacking us, and we have to protect us against the other, the Muslims, before it was the communists. And it's also a kind of national mythology. It's to say we have to build the borders or make it hard for people to come here because the others are the terrible people. I mean, looking into the America, the States, isn't it something like 13,000 people getting killed by fellow citizens in the States everywhere? The guns that's around there, we don't have guns here in Norway like you have in America. There's so much mythology here about the other is the dangerous person, but the danger is just around the corner by your neighbor or your fellow citizens, I think, sometimes. So it's very strange that this kind of the other is attacking us, and then we are digging into maybe the fatal or the 9/11 attack was maybe not as we thought it was about the other attacking us. Because maybe this was some suspicious things here. People is reacting against that kind of new explanation. They want that older explanation with a 16-year of investment in the against terror kind of mythology. They don't want that kind of thing being an alternative or being looked at, I think. So people are very conservative in a way by saying that this old Bush war against terror was maybe right, and we don't tell me it's not right or something.
Yeah, I agree.
So many years later, that's one of them. Do you agree, David?
Yeah, I agree. And I've talked to a number of Americans, and it almost seems to be unpatriotic for anyone to question 9/11, the story, because the official story has been behind so much of American foreign policy. So if you question the story, you have to question the basis for American policy, lives, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. But what is interesting now normal to challenge the reason to go into Iraq, and the fact that it was a complete myth, a fabricated myth, the idea of weapons of mass destruction. And there were a few voices that said they didn't exist. But it was an overwhelming chorus led by Tony Blair and George Bush that we should go into Iraq. And of course, there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. And going into Afghanistan hasn't done much help to anybody. And I think all of that is now acceptable. But it's very interesting how the media can criticize the decisions to go to war, the background to the war, but not the events that were fabricated in order to encourage the public to support it, because they had to have the public behind the events if they were going to go into the Middle East in the way they did.
You know, and it's so deep. I've got this box of wires to electronics that I've bought throughout the years, and somehow you just acquire all these wires, and I stick them in a box, and no matter how neatly I put them in there, when you try to pull them out, it just comes out in a big ball, right? So, you've got the corporate media and the government agenda surrounding 9/11, but you've also got this complicated mess of personal attachment to the official story. Not even out of patriotism, but for instance, I was listening to a woman years ago. I was not even involved in the conversation. I just heard it down the hallway, but she was talking about her boyfriend who had come back from, I believe it was Iraq, who had been hit by a roadside bomb, suffered injuries. I don't remember what the exact nature of them was, but she was talking about how he's embarrassed because when they go out to eat, she has to cut his food for him because of these injuries. And somebody like that, my generation, I was college age when 9/11 happened. My generation saw 9/11 and went and joined the Army thinking that, they were avenging that terrible crime, that they were doing what was right for America, for patriotism, and to go free people that we were told were in, desperate straits. 9/11 happened because we ignored the world. We were told. And so these people went out thinking they were doing the right thing, a lot of them, and now they suffered these injuries, or families might have lost loved ones in these wars, and they want to believe that their loved ones were lost, or that they are suffering these injuries because of something noble that they did. And their heart was maybe even in the right place, some of these soldiers. And so, at least they were doing the right thing. Now you bring in these questions surrounding the event that inspired them to go make these life-changing decisions, and for a lot of people, it's an instant non-starter. I mean, people want to believe that their son died for something important, for something that was noble,
yes.
And so, and then also you have these people that were probably out in the media jumping on the people that raised these questions about 9/11 initially. They put a large part of their name and ego behind defending the official story, and it becomes like you've got to defend that, no matter how many holes come up in the official story in the years that follow. And so there's all these personal reasons that play into it. So it's like that tangled ball in my box of electronic wires. It becomes very difficult to untangle to get towards our goal of having a new investigation. David, you've done your part in reaching out to your organization, and there's probably engineers listening to us right now. In your view, what can more people in your profession do to raise awareness within the engineering community?
Well, I mean, for me, the big milestone is the release of this report. And I'm hoping that it'll come with some graphics showing that they really understand the movement of the building from a single point failure, how it would collapse, and then how on earth we could create this. So when that report comes out, and I'm preparing people for it in the engineering community, and I'm going to Seville to a meeting in a couple of weeks, and I'll be talking about it down there to the European groups. When that report comes out, I'm really keen that it gets a good press, and we have people standing by like myself to support it and say, yes, I believe what's written here, and I can see the advanced engineering that's been employed. It's an independent report, but anybody can criticize it. Here you are, take it away and have a look at it. So I think we've got to stand up as a community. I've got to convince my senior engineers in London to take it seriously, and I just hope that all the connections we've made in the media, in the newspapers, in the TV, will step forward, and the report will be a great piece of work. So that's my hope, and I'm there to speak in seminars or whatever, but I'm ready to help.
Well, that's excellent, and there's a lot of people that can simply take the materials that AE 9/11 Truth has prepared for the general public and pass them around, share them. I say this every week on the show almost. Just the small things that we do every day add up to a lot. It's like saving your change when you go buy your coffee in the morning and putting it in a jar, and then eventually you got like $100 there. You can go buy yourself something nice. Well, the same thing builds up when we do little actions. We share information. We put a link to like a video of Leroy Halsey giving his progress report presentation in the comments section of an article. We send it to engineers that we know and architects. Just do anything that we can to get this information out there and push back against this large wall that we've run into, and we've cracked it pretty well, I think. I mean, a lot of people hear Building 7, they immediately think of the evidence of controlled demolition that they heard a friend talking about. So our information has been attached to the term Building 7. I think that's a really good accomplishment of AE 9/11 Truth and the other activists out there raising awareness of it. Truls, I want more people like you out there in the media. Yeah, our media here in the United States, I mean, you might as well be watching a puppet show for children now. I mean, it's like the only usefulness it has is if there's some kind of breaking news, they're the first people on the spot. But you turn down the volume and watch it, and then put on some alternative news person to give you their take and commentary. There might be people like you, not just in Norway but around the world, who are inspired by your story and what you're doing, heroically standing up to all of this pressure. What kind of advice would you give them about breaking into the media, creating their own independent voices, and making it larger to drown out the corporate influences?
I think today there is a lot of people who has some experience or has used some times in the mass media who is actually going away from them because they feel it's kind of stupefying them. It's too stupid, some of these things they're doing, very commercialized. So this is popping up also with the internet and other new websites and other things. There is coming up a lot of smaller, more independent, new media, new publications, which is, and that's also a broader mentality thing here, because I don't actually believe in the mass or in the majority anymore. I think the majority has enough to do with themselves. So this kind of more critical thing here is for the smaller groups of people, the minorities. And that's a lot of different affinity groups around the globe. I mean, internationally there is a lot of very interesting, I mean, in ecology, in peace movements, all around there is more enlightened people around. They are always in a minority that don't have majority. So I believe more in maybe a kind of inspiration from the anarchists, who is saying that we want peace, we don't want this kind of power against us. Peace, please let us be and not interfere with all the things we do. So I think new networks is growing up, who's more enlightened. We don't accept this kind of, populist or commercialized or kind of power games by the big politics, and they want to be aside. I think those people will be enlightened, and that's people who's reading newspapers as we produce, and around in Europe there is a lot of different new newspapers. After this event here, there is at least 3 other independent media who has asked me to cooperate with them in Europe, in Germany, in Denmark, other places. And this is people who has a background in mass media and couldn't stay there anymore. So I think the majority will always be deceived in a kind of way, I mean, in different areas of life. But we should also have a concern here for the relatives of the people killed in 9/11 back in 2001. And actually, I was also attacked by some people saying that I didn't have compassion for the people who were left behind. But actually, the people left behind was the people pressing for the report and the investigation. And they are still trying with lawyers and other people, and like also you do in your organization, to get a new investigation into this thing. So, I mean, we really have compassion for the people who've been hurt by this. So I think there's a lot of different humanists, people who has a concern being responsible, but we are always in a minority. I don't think we should be too much, believe that the majority in the world would like to hear the truth. I think the truth is for fewer people, but we have a better life when we have living in truth. I mean, the clarity we maybe have here in this kind of discussion forum as we have here just now, and other places. Some people want to live in clarity. Other people is satisfied with other ways of living. So I'm not too optimistic, but I like to spread the word around to smaller groups of people in the world who doesn't accept this kind of power games that's going on. And that's my contribution.
All right, we're towards the end of the show, but I want to hear from both of you in 1 minute, starting with David. 9/11 was an event that happened in the United States. Speak to your fellow countrymen. Why should the people of Norway be concerned about what really happened on September 11th?
Well, that's a good intro to a group that contacted me after the article. They're vets from Afghanistan, officers, who between themselves have met, around 50 of them in a group in Bergen, and they're convinced that the 9/11 story doesn't make sense, and delighted to see we're getting on with uncovering it. Their key point, and this is the way I'd like to finish, is to say that if there's an organization that can do this, that can completely change world events by under government, for the government or outside the government, we need to find out who they are and stop it happening again. So if my small contribution is to make it more difficult in future for an event to happen, I would have done my piece.
Truls,
go ahead. Yeah, I will add to this that I think we are contributing to a more skeptical attitude to this kind of big event and the propaganda. I mean, in Norway we have a right-wing government, and we are also making a very hostile environment against Russia, against people around thinking there is coming terrorists from the Muslims around. I mean, in Norway we actually had a white Norwegian who was the biggest terrorist. The only big event in Norway was by a citizen of Norway, a white man. Anders Breivik was doing it against. And still we are believing by this myth or mythology or propaganda that there is coming people from the Muslim countries to kill us. I mean, any moment. I mean, this propaganda that the right-wing government and in media and this NATO thing that Norway is very contributing to, I mean, supporting to, with new American soldiers coming to stations here in Norway, fearing that Russia will attack us soon. I mean, all this kind of anxiety that's building up should be fight against, like we are doing here by saying, please don't believe in all these stories you hear. That's our contribution, I think.
Absolutely, and of course 9/11 was an event that killed people from all over the world were in those towers, and what happens in one part of the world sends ripples all over the planet, so we need to be concerned about our fellow man, and when we see a tremendous injustice like we see happening with 9/11 and the official story, the attacks on those who are raising very reasonable questions about why these buildings came down, we all need to be concerned and do our part, raising awareness and making the world a better place. Truls Lie, David Llewelyn, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall, and please keep me updated.
And thank you for your work too. Thank you.
Glad to help.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week. Good luck.